Both of us were born in the 1970s, in the days of bell-bottom jeans and TV shows like MASH and Soul Train. And when our mothers dressed us in silky shirts with big collars. So we were born in the 70s, but we're really products of the 80s, when it seemed like everybody was into Michael Jackson, Phil Collins, and Miami Vice, and afros and mullets. So we grew up in the same decades, but we encountered very different worlds. And we had no idea that our stories were paving the way for a friendship that would happen several years later, where his story and my story became our story.
When I was 29 years old, I met my father for the first time. Growing up without a father had a tremendous impact on my identity and self-worth. So from childhood to young adulthood, I spent a lot of time pretending to be someone else while robbing the world that I lived in of the real me. My neighborhood in Allentown, Pennsylvania, allowed the real me to show up on the scene sometimes. And the real me enjoyed dancing and food. You can walk down one of our blocks back then and hear salsa music blasting. And the very next block at the same value, hip hop. Beef patties that we called patillos, coconut ice that we called limbes, and my personal favorite, baked macaroni and cheese, collard greens, cornbread with a touch of some hot sauce. Some call neighborhoods like the one I grew up in a ghetto, hood, inner city. I called it home. And best believe in those spaces and places of the hood, there were laws, rules, and codes. And in order for me to thrive, I had to adapt, overcome, and keep it moving. So there was fun and beauty there, but also consistent tension, which led to violence and pain.
My early years were spent in the suburbs of Buffalo, New York. And everything wasn't perfect, but overall, life was good. And I was a happy kid. I have great memories of running around the neighborhood with my sister and our friends, playing games like freeze tag and red light, green light. I remember my mom reciting silly poems that were passed down from my grandfather, and I can still rattle them off today, like the one about the purple bird who sat upon the curb. And one of my most vivid memories is of my dad teaching me how to swing a golf club by hitting the tops off of dandelions in our front yard. After I graduated from high school, I went away to a small college. And it was there in that environment, right outside of Philadelphia, that I experienced the gift of ethnic diversity. And it was a little taste of heaven on earth. Soon after, I met the woman who would become my wife. We got married 2 years later, started a family, and we moved to Darian's hometown of Allentown, Pennsylvania, where I began working with children and teenagers in some of the under-resourced neighborhoods in the city.
Monday, February 13th, 1995. A group of us were playing cards at my friend Ben's record store, and 15, 20 minutes into the game, some of them began to play with their guns, including Ben. And the next moment, I go from playing cards to standing in front of my friend Ben with him pointing his gun at me like this, asking me to trust him. One of my other friends grabbed his arm in his hand and pointed the gun down. Ben pulled back, pointed the gun directly at himself, looked at me and said, "I know my gun." And he pulled the trigger. That day, Ben accidentally took his life. And that scene played over and over again in my mind every single day. And so I began to reevaluate my own life. When I look back on that day, Ben died, but his death helped me live.
On the day Ben died, most likely I was sitting in my office, just about 2 miles down the road, trying to come up with creative ideas for the mentoring programs I was leading to better serve the youth in the city. I loved the work I was doing, but I was in way over my head, and I knew I needed help. A few years later, this one guy I kept seeing around, and something in my gut told me that I needed his help.
So, our stories come together in 1997. And I did not like Bill at all the first year knowing him. Seriously, I did not like him at all the first year knowing him because of an interaction I observed Bill having with someone of color. And based on my own personal experiences, I assumed he had an issue with race. So I stayed away from Bill. But thankfully, Bill did not stay away from me. And one day approaches me and asked me to help him with the youth program that he was leading. And I politely told him no. About a month later, Bill approaches me again. And before he can get the entire request out, I stop him mid-sentence and I politely tell him no. About a month or two later, Bill approaches me again. Now I'm annoyed. My body language and my face tell Bill I'm annoyed. And before I can get no out, Bill grabs me and says,
"Would you just listen to me? Would you just hear me out before you say no?"
Now let me be honest with my first thought. This brother must have lost his mind. Straight up. But after I got over myself, I looked right at Bill and I saw two things: compassion and empathy. So I said yes, and we became friends. And we have had the wonderful privilege of being very close friends for almost 18 years.
You know, a lot of time has passed, and over the years, our friendship has grown. And we believe it's grown out of a willingness to open up our hearts to each other and to be vulnerable. Over the years, we have celebrated together and we have mourned together. We have laughed and we have cried uncontrollably. Our shared experiences have allowed me to see the world through his eyes. And through his eyes, I see my own privilege and the importance of listening to and learning from others, especially those who are not like me. Through his eyes, I see how words such as they, them, and those people are hurtful and divisive. Through his eyes, I see the beauty of the skin of our black and brown brothers and sisters and all their varying shades of melanin, of which I essentially have zero. And through his eyes, I see how all people are worthy of the same dignity, respect, and love. Today, I can say the work I'm doing now has been greatly influenced by our friendship. In 2008, Darian became a founding board member of the nonprofit organization I lead, and he traveled outside the United States for the first time, and he went with me to Guatemala City, where we have schools and scholarship programs for more than 500 children who are living in one of the largest and most marginalized urban settlement community in all of Central America. Since that trip, Darian has traveled around the world to Africa, Central America, and the Caribbean to serve and to work with indigenous leaders who are making a difference in their communities. As we look back over our personal and shared experiences, we stand in awe of what has happened in our lives. And we believe our lives would be very different if we hadn't been willing to open up our hearts with each other.
We also needed courage to invite each other into the storybook of our lives. Our relationship gave us the courage to remain at the table of other relationships, even when they were uncomfortable and painful. Bill's pain was a gift to me because I realized pain shows no prejudice. So no matter what color you are, where you come from, how much money you have or you don't have, pain shows no prejudice. And Bill and I found not only common ground, but similarities in our pain, and we got healing together. When Bill and I worked together serving young people and families, we had an amazing team, a very diverse team, cross-cultural, cross-generational, but that also presented some unique challenges. But the team leaned into the discomfort and embraced the tension. And that courage created an environment where hundreds of young people from very different backgrounds could come together in the same space and simply belong and be. That work that Bill and I did in the early 2000s set the stage for the work we both do today. Once again, I'm a founding board member of the nonprofit organization Bill currently leads. He is a founding board member of the nonprofit organization I currently lead. And I am committed today to a very similar work that Bill asked me to help him with when we became friends. The best version of me is we.
And we're continually learning from each other that it requires commitment to truly live a we story rather than a me story. And it takes commitment because this isn't always easy. But through commitment, there can be a ripple effect that goes way beyond just two people. Our oldest sons grew up as really close friends, and it was just amazing to sit back and watch how their friendship impacted each other's lives. Several years ago, we were on a family road trip and we were driving through a very rural part of the country. It was time to stop at a fast food restaurant for lunch. So my son and I walked in, really crowded place, got in the back in one of the long lines. I was looking up at the menu, trying to decide what to order. I start feeling my son tug at my shirt, saying, "Dad, Dad." And I'm looking at the menu and I'm thinking, okay, when I turn to him, he's just going to tell me what he wants to order from the menu. But I turn and I see this look of confusion and surprise on his face. And he looks up at me and he said, "Hey, Dad, there's all white people here." I looked around, looked back at him, and I said, "Yeah, you're right. And you're one of them. In case you forgot." My son was 9 years old at that time. And as I look back on that day, my heart is filled with gratitude that he grew up in an environment that caused that situation for him to be abnormal. You know, sometimes as an adult, maybe in an attempt to reveal our perspective on inclusiveness, we'll say things like, "Well, when I look at a black person, I don't see color. I see a human being." Although that may be well-intended, I believe we should see color. I believe we should want to see color. And I believe we should celebrate color. And especially in the times that we're living in today, it is our hope that more and more people would be committed to a movement of we. A movement that genuinely and relentlessly seeks a full expression of the colors and cultures that exist in our cities and in our communities.
Let us all be committed to building bridges, not just across black lines and white lines, but across any line that exists that separates and divides. I'd like us all for a moment to think about our own realms of influence. And in our worlds, wherever there are any lines that exist that separate and divide, I want to challenge us all to build a bridge. Build a bridge. And what we've learned from our own personal experiences is it will take willingness to engage, courage to remain, and commitment to get it done.
We truly believe this. We truly believe that the best version of me is we. And on the surface, when you look at those two words, me and we, there's really not that much of a difference, just two letters. But when it's just me, though, me is down. Me is lonely. Me is limited.
But when it's we are up. We are together. And we are powerful.
And we is so much stronger than me. Thank you.